I'm going to be responding to Fernando Zandrari's major claim, which was that the Electoral College impedes the democratic election process. My refutation would be that the Electoral College actually promotes the democratic election process. So Nando actually did this, he supported his claim with three sub-claims, I guess you could say. And I'm going to be addressing each one. So he stated that the foundation of the Electoral College is inherently problematic, but I'm actually saying that the Electoral College was established in a conflict-preventing manner. According to an article in the Washington Post, the founders who sat in the 1787 Constitutional Convention lavished an extraordinary amount of argument on the Electoral College, and it was by no means one-sided. Pennsylvania jurist James Wilson believed that if we are to establish a national government, the president should be chosen by a direct national vote of the people. Roger Sherman of Connecticut replied that the president ought to be elected by Congress, since he feared that direct election of presidents by the people would lead to the creation of a monarchy. And independence of the executive from supreme legislature was, in his opinion, the very essence of tyranny, if there was any such thing. Sherman was not trying to undermine the popular will, but to keep it from being distorted by a president who mistook popular election as a mandate for dictatorship. So the Electoral College was actually established with a pro-democratic mindset since the beginning, and the choices that our founding fathers made were actually insightful towards the expectations of this country. Nando also gave a fact that strict voting requirements only allowed white landowning men to vote. However, at the time, they were the ones who were establishing the country, so there really wasn't any other option. So I just don't think that supports his argument very well. His second claim was that the Electoral College allows for disproportionate representation. He also said that candidates focus their campaign on swing states and ignore the states they know will most likely win or lose. So I'm saying that the Electoral College actually provides a fair representation of the people. According to U.S. News, while some pundits complain about safe states and swing states, those labels just reflect how the people of those states are likely to vote. About twice as many people live in swing states as in competitive congressional districts. The size of the state does not lessen its representation. So while some states are actually larger in size, they do have more electors, and this is only because there are more people residing in them. And to compensate for the smaller states, there are more electors given in order to maintain a balance. His third claim is that the Electoral College creates a false mandate to govern. However, I'm saying the exact opposite, which is the Electoral College does not create a false mandate to govern. Nando provided the evidence that Reagan is famous for winning a landslide victory against Jimmy Carter in 1980 when he won 90% of the electoral vote, but only 51% of the popular vote. This evidence is invalid because the candidate that he provided won both the popular and electoral vote. If America went by popular votes, it would allow the candidate to win, even ignoring all other votes. According to an article in Business Insider, the Electoral College forces a winner who has a majority of the electoral votes. Without it, and with a compelling third party, someone could become president with only 34% of the vote, when 66% of the country voted against the president. That doesn't scream stability. So therefore, if we were to go with a popular voting system, it would be unfair. So the Electoral College promotes the democratic process.
All right, well, I thought that you did a pretty nice job kind of identifying the advocate's claims and presenting counterclaims on most of those points. You do need to address the argument that the advocate makes sometimes. There's not really any discussion of their evidence or the way they've reasoned. It's mostly the counterclaims that you're presenting. They're good counterclaims, but I do think occasionally that you're missing opportunities to respond to how the advocate reasoned or whether or not they provided sufficient evidence to prove a particular point. On the first point on your counterclaim, you're basically saying that ideally the Electoral College has prevented undemocratic ideas, and you mentioned the notion of dictatorship, and we've got Wilson and Sherman debating about it in 1787. I thought that was okay. It's interesting historically. It shows that the motivation is in fact democratic in process. I do think that it ignores a little bit of the advocate's argument, which suggests that democracy is based on a concept of equal voting principles. And I think you need to kind of have a stronger argument that addresses that. There might be some problems with that premise about equality of voting, and there are additional issues that go on there. And the notion that equality of voting is the standard, for instance, it doesn't really get attacked, except that you just say the Electoral College prevents something else that's undemocratic. Not a bad argument, but I'm not sure, like I said, it's addressing the advocate's underlying premise there. The disproportionate argument, it wasn't really very clear what you were saying about the swing states. I appreciated that you went to bat for them. Is that too precious? You went to bat for the swing states? But the idea here is that, that they still have a lot of people in those particular areas, and that's what makes them important. So it is related to the popular vote in some way. I think that's the point you're making, is that, swing states are not desolate areas where there isn't anybody living. They're significant urban populations where a lot of people are living, which means that they're getting a lot of attention, which is an appeal to democratic principles. I think that's the inference that you're trying to get across. I just didn't think it came across very clearly. And so you need maybe a more explicit explanation or declarative on that particular point. But the analysis, I think, is right on, and it's spot on to the point that's being presented there. And then on the last point, I do think that you have a pretty good point when you're saying, well, Reagan won both the popular vote and the electoral vote. The idea that there was some influence because of that is not really, I don't know that the advocate had a demonstration on that particular point, and you kind of just say, well, it doesn't matter because it was both, went the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. That's a good response. I think that's fine. The other argument is talking about what the alternative to the Electoral College would be, and that's direct popular election of the president. And you've got this explanation about how it could turn out to be that 1/3 of the population could determine what's going on, and you got 66% opposed to it. I like that idea, but again, I think there needs to be a little bit more context, and you could maybe compare to an election where we do have an electoral college winner who got less than the popular vote, but the difference between them would be maybe a percentage point or two, as opposed to where we had a popular vote, where if you had 3 major candidates running and there was a fairly equal division of the votes, then you'd have not just, half of the country who was opposed to the person who got elected, but 2/3 of the country. And that's kind of that's the argument that you're making. I just think it needs to be clarified a little more. All right, thank you.